I guess it's my turn. I'm sitting here looking at my notes, and all of a sudden I hear the music coming up. Oh, I guess I got work to do here. Greg Kokel here. The show is Stand to Reason, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to be taking a lot of our calls here from our open mic list. That is where you can call in at your leisure, or I should say connect at your leisure, usually on a website, going to our homepage at str.org, under podcasts, look at live podcasts, and then follow the prompts to leave your question, and then we can play it, when we get to it here on the show. You don't have to be present for that. I wanted to make an observation, though, before I get to these calls, and this is actually something I thought of many, many years ago, but it bears mentioning, I think. And that is that here I answer questions. I've been doing this for 35 years. People call in, ask a question, and I offer my thoughts on it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, whatever. You're the judge on that. But I want to, this is my gifting. This is the area where I have capability or skill, which I've nurtured as a student of my craft over the years, but there's obviously a spiritual element to it. But the point I want to make is that a person's spirituality, for lack of a better word, is not measured by his gifting. My ability to answer questions or to speak or do radio or whatever is not, even effectively, is not a measure of my spirituality. A person's spirituality is not measured by his gifts, but rather by the fruits of the Spirit that are manifest in that person's life, okay? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. 9 of them. I hope I got them all. And the reason I say this is there are people that are very gifted as communicators or even very knowledgeable in Scripture or can do both really well, but nevertheless are not good representatives of Christ in the area of spiritual fruit. The thing that is produced as a result of the Spirit's action in someone's life. So I want my gifts to be well used, and I want to be a student of my craft. I want to be a good steward of the opportunities that God has given me behind the mic, in front of an audience, writing, wherever. But I know that's not the measure of the depth of my spirituality. Rather, it is the fruits that are produced in me, those 9 things that I talked about, and some I do better than others. But I will tell you, just quite frankly, that over the years I have focused on praying for those fruits that I think that I especially needed, and that is faithfulness, patience, and self-control. It can be a loose cannon sometimes. And when I'm behind the mic, I'm on my best behavior, just saying. It's when I'm not behind the mic where I have to be more careful, because everybody's not watching except for the one that matters, who is God. Coram Deo, before God. We live before God. So I wanted those particular fruits manifest in my life. Yeah, the Spirit produces them. There's a sense in which we can cooperate with that, just like a gardener tends a tree to produce its fruits. But nevertheless, the life force of those fruits comes from the Lord, and I appeal to Him for help in the fruits in my own life, because that's the measure. Just saying. All right. So let's go to our first caller from our open mic calls. His name is Silas. And let's see what he has to say. Silas?
Hey, Greg. This is Silas over here in Arkansas. Hey, I was just curious what your thoughts were on preterism and the belief that Jesus came back in 70 A.D. I've had a few friends who have been talking a lot about we are in Satan's short season that we see in Revelation 21. So I was just curious what your thoughts were on that. I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you and the team do. And I'll actually be at the Stand to Reason conference in Dallas coming up here pretty soon in a few weeks. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Silas, and my apologies for taking so long to get to your question because Dallas happened a couple of months ago. But better late than never, the saying goes. You know, when I encountered some who held this view, the preterist view regarding eschatology. Now, eschatology is end times or the final things or the last things. And sometimes that can be very general, like final resurrection to reward or judgment. That's the way I deal with it very generally in the story of reality. Or it can specify a particular chain of events that lead up to that final event. There you have different schools of thought. You have premillennial, you have postmillennial, you have amillennial. Those are the three characteristic views. But you also have preterists, much smaller category. And a preterist means past. The preterist tense is the past tense. And as you pointed out, Silas, the preterism view of eschatology or end times is that there is a final resurrection somewhere down the line, but the events that were described by Jesus in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13, the Olivet Discourse, and other biblical events related to that, these have all taken place. Jesus has returned, scare quotes around that word, and with power and great glory, as described in Matthew 24, and now we're in an age subsequent to that. So when I heard that, I guess I'd say, on this view, I would be deeply disappointed because my thinking is, this is it? This is the second coming of Christ. What we're living in now and have lived in for the last 2,000 years is post-second coming. I thought the second coming of Christ was the blessed hope. It's what we looked forward to in all the passages that refer to this, say, 2 Thessalonians. And even in Matthew, you know, all these things that were happening, Matthew 24, or the sign of his coming, and there you will see the sign, the coming of the Son of Man, the angels go forth, the clouds part, there he is for all to see. In other words, the way I've characterized the Matthew 24 coming is the visible, powerful, and conclusive return of Christ. And conclusive is important because my take on that is that's the end. All right? And that's what the question was that the disciples asked in just the chapter before, or in that chapter. I'm going to Matthew 24 now. I didn't have it open. Oh, Matthew comes before Mark. The question that they asked, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming? Now, he was talking about the destruction of the temple. You'll be hearing wars and rumors of wars. No, I'm trying to find. Okay, here it is. He was sitting on the Mount of Olives, verse 3 of Matthew 24. The disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen?" Talking about the destruction of the temple in particular, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. So there are actually three things in their request. When will these things happen? The destruction of the temple. What will be the sign of your coming? That's 2. And 3, and of the end of the age. Now, the temptation is to think of all those being coterminous. They're all kind of boom, boom, boom. They all happen together. But that isn't the case because we know the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. And when he talks about the sign, that's in verse 30, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And then he talks about sending forth his angels, etc. That appears to be, as I described it, the powerful, visible, and conclusive return of Christ, with the emphasis there on conclusive if you figure the entire narrative. Now, what the preterists say is that pretty much has all taken place. And as your friends have reflected to you, Silas, Jesus already came. To which I respond, really? This is it? This is the best he could do with his coming? Because it doesn't seem the world has changed one iota, except for maybe gotten worse over the last 2,000 years. So what is the blessed hope of his coming if it isn't some kind of restoration, the end of all things, the end of the age? Now, I acknowledge that the temple being destroyed as Jesus predicted happened in 70 AD, all right, as a matter of history. So this raises a question, well, if that happened then what about the rest of it? Now, it just strikes me as obvious. I actually don't understand why others don't see this. It strikes me as obvious that a portion of what Jesus said, when will these things be, the destruction of the temple, that already took place in history. But the other portion that Jesus said, the sign of his coming in the end of the age, where the Son of Man appears in the sky with all the tribes of the earth mourning, they'll see him coming in the clouds of the sky with power and glory, has not happened yet. Obviously. I understand that on this view there was some sign that somebody saw that they characterized as the coming of the Lord, but it certainly doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that's described here. I don't go deep in this particular issue. I'm just saying I didn't take it seriously because it seems obviously false, at least taken as a whole. So this brings us to a question, though, about prophecy and fulfillment. And I think it's entirely fair to say, based on some other examples of prophetic fulfillment, that oftentimes God's purpose is to fulfill things in stages that are separated by periods of time. So in the Old Testament, there was no distinction between the first advent of Messiah and the second, or the advent of Messiah as the Lamb of God, the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, and the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who we see on display in the book of Revelation. We see both characterizations in some fashion in the Old Testament of the anointed Messiah, but even then there was some question, well, how do we make sense of these two particulars here? They seem like opposing. And now we know in the fulfillment we look back is that there was a partial fulfillment at one point and a later fulfillment at another, that Jesus came as the Lamb of God at one point and will come as the Lion of the tribe of Judah at another point. And we have at least 2,000 years between those two events. What I'm setting up now is the idea that when it comes to prophetic utterance regarding future events, that actually I think it's called like the prophetic perspective, that they're looking at mountaintops that seem in line with each other and close to each other without being aware of the big valley in between the two mountains, all right, which is a period of time. So we see the first coming, second coming, we see the Lamb of God, we see the Lion of tribe of Judah. From the Old Testament perspective, as they're like pretty close to each other, coterminous or something. But now we realize that there's a big gap of 2,000 years in between those two comings. And that's how we make sense of those prophecies. We also see this in the prophecy of Elijah coming. And the disciples asked Jesus, well, doesn't Elijah come first before the Messiah comes? And Jesus said, well, Elijah has come, if you're able to take that. And that he was referring to John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist kind of seemed a lot like Elijah. he was a prophet in the wilderness, wore kind of hairy jacket and ate strange things. And, well, that was kind of like that Elijah guy. But then there's another one. There's a sense that Elijah is also coming in the future. We see in, Revelation 11. He seems to show up again before the final return of Christ. So here's another circumstance where you have a singular prophetic word that is fulfilled in two different periods of time, partially and in a typological kind of way. Well, John the Baptist is kind of that guy, but there's also another one coming, and that's the second part. So all I'm saying is prophecy sometimes works this way. It's weird, I get it, but that's what seems to be happening here in Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. Jesus gives a word about something that is going to happen in the lifetime of most of the disciples. The destruction, or I should say many of the, I don't know most, but this happened in 70. Paul was gone by that time, so was James, the disciple James, not the brother of Jesus, James, but he was killed by Herod with the sword. And so you've got, you have a number of them, I should say, by the end of the, close to the end of the first century, you have the toppling of the temple because of the attack by Rome, the siege that is laid of Jerusalem by Titus, and then the destruction of the temple and the disbursement of the peoples. That's all depicted here in Matthew 24, and that seems to have been fulfilled. But when you read the rest of the stuff, it sure doesn't seem to have been fulfilled, at least in the plain sense that Jesus seems to be describing it in this passage. And so therefore I take the rest of this to be in the future. The second coming, in the sense that Jesus is describing, the visible, powerful, conclusive return of Christ, where he sets his foot there at the Mount of Olives and there's an earthquake and all of that stuff, that hasn't happened yet. When he brings his armies and he's the Lion of the tribe of Judah and he sets things right and all the other things that seem to go to be associated with that return of Christ. And again, I don't slice and dice these things too much. Others have done that. But certainly there's a second coming of Christ, and it hasn't happened yet. And this is why, or we're stuck with, this is it? Really? I thought it would be a little bit better for everybody when Jesus returned. So I don't take the preterist view very seriously. I acknowledge that some things mentioned in the Olivet Discourse have taken place in history in the past. Ergo, preterist, and in my case, partial preterist. Some of the things prophesied there have taken place in the past. But the bulk of it, certainly the second coming of Christ, has not taken place. It's kind of interesting the way Jesus puts this. He offers a warning, and he says, if anyone says to you, I'm reading now in verse 23 and following, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I've told you in advance. And then he goes on and he develops this idea a little bit. He says, so if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, don't go out. Or behold, he's in the inner room, don't believe them. For, why not? By the way, why not believe them? Here's why, verse 27, just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west. By the way, when that happens, do you think everybody can see that? Absolutely. Nobody's got to tell you, hey, there's lightning right here in the sky. You can say, I just saw it. In the same way, Jesus is saying, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. And then he talks about tribulation, and then he talks about the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky with power and glory. I cited that verse just a bit ago. So he's saying there's no reason for you to be misled by false claims that Jesus has already come. Rather, when he comes, everyone will see. Just like the lightning from the east to the west, everyone will see. No one has to tell you. Now, it strikes me that this flies directly in the face of preterism regarding the second coming, at least as I understand it. All right? Jesus has not returned yet. Thankfully, because if he has, the return was disappointing. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back to more questions when I return on Stand to Reason. All righty. We're having a debate about the questions now. We have two here from Dan, who is our resident atheist. I should say our open mic atheist, and he sends a lot of questions. Always glad to answer Dan. And let's take the second one that I had in order first. Okay, this is the one that has to do with Genesis 1:1. You see that there, Kyle?
Greg, Genesis 1:1 states, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." There are some huge claims within these first 10 words. First of all, in the beginning. Who knows that there was a beginning? Isn't the universe eternal? Hasn't time and space and matter always existed? Can anything exist for 0 seconds? Secondly, God. Where did God come from? Can God exist outside time and space? How is that possible? That is illogical. For God to exist, time must exist. Thirdly, the heavens and the earth. Well, we know that the heavens, the stars, and the wonderful galaxies that are 13.8 billion light years away from us have been around much longer than the Bible states. So, Greg, who wrote Genesis 1:1 and how do they know? Aren't these just huge claims without any evidence? Can you provide any evidence for the beginning of the universe, or a God, or the heavens that were created by such a God?
All right, thank you, Dan. Sorry about that, whatever that was in the background. That wasn't Dan, but it was somebody's equipment. There's a lot going on there, and it is that was Dan's fault? Okay. Dan's fault. I was trying to spare him that, but the bearded beast just wanted to make it clear. It was not him. It was not us. It was Dan. Okay, got it, Dan. Thank you for the question. It's an odd question. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you asked there, but taken as a whole, it's an odd question because you're saying, where is the evidence that the universe had a beginning? The irony is that virtually every other atheist that I have ever engaged with or read about or anything all acknowledges the beginning of the universe at the singularity called the Big Bang. No one believes in an eternal universe anymore for good reason. This was a strong belief 100 years ago, prior to Einstein. I think even Einstein might have originally held that view, but he was overwhelmed by the facts, both the facts of Big Bang cosmology and other particulars, and I'll mention them. So it's I'm going to give you two reasons, Dan, why we are confident that the universe had a beginning. One is Big Bang cosmology, all right? And there are different variations of the Big Bang, but they all amount to the same thing. There was when there was nothing, and then there was everything. Bang! It all popped into existence, all right? The universe, or to put it another way, the universe has an age. If the universe has an age, then there was a point when it came into being. Now, from a physicalist perspective, that's when time began. Time, space, matter all began at that singularity. Now, if time, space, matter, according to the physicists, astronomers, and atheists' view, all came into being at sometime in the past at a finite point in the past, then the universe is not eternal, based on the scientific evidence. It had a beginning. Now, there's another argument that I'll offer you, and that is very pretty straightforward. Did you ever watch a movie where, say cops come into a home and it's empty, and someone picks up the coffee cup, and the coffee cup is still hot? Or if you want to go to an old Western, the posse comes upon a campsite and they put their hand by the fire and feel that the coals are still warm. All right? Now, what does that signify? In the first case, it means somebody was there not too long ago, because if it had been a long time, the coffee would be room temp. Or the bad guys the posse was after in the second illustration were there not too long ago, or else the ashes would be cold. The fact that there's still heat in both cases means the thing that produced the heat happened recently. Now, the universe is cooling off. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. The entropy, all the energy is being lost, so it's not capable of being used again. There is some time in the future when everything will eventually stop moving. All the usable energy will have been spent, and the universe will be at room temperature, which is 0 Kelvin. Some hundreds of degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Actually, Fahrenheit, Celsius doesn't matter at that point. It's all the same. All right. So the universe will be dead, cold. If the universe were eternal, had been eternally existing, the universe would be dead right now. It would be cold, stone dead right now. It's not. The coffee's still warm. The fire coals are still hot. Therefore, the universe is not old in that sense. It's not eternally old. The fire was started at some point, the coffee was made at some point, and it's still cooling off. If the universe was eternally old, it would be cold stone dead right now. So that's physics. Now, this raises another question. If the universe came into existence at some point in the past, virtually universally acknowledged by all, based on a number of lines of evidence I've offered too, the question that is appropriate to ask is, what caused that effect? Because our universal experience is that effects have causes that are adequate to the effect. And so I was actually preparing some material on this point, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 years ago now, in Katowice, Poland, to give an address to a group of Christian leaders to help them navigate with naturalistic atheism that was predominant in Europe. And I was talking about this notion called the Big Bang. And as I was working on this in the lobby of this hotel, it was a resort area where the conference was being held, and there were a lot of people that were around that were drinking and enjoying the music and dancing or whatever it was, and I'm working off to the side there. All of a sudden, there's this big bang, and everything went completely silent. And you know what everybody was thinking. They're thinking, what was that? Of course, they knew what it was. That was a big bang. What they were thinking was, what caused that? Of course, nowadays, if you hear a big bang in a hotel, there's all kinds of possibilities. Not good. But it turned out that somebody had a wheelchair with a rubber inner tube in it, and they were pumping it up with a pump, and it overinflated and exploded, right? And that was the answer to the question, what caused that? But I'll tell you, nobody in that hotel thought that the Big Bang banged itself. Something caused it. What was it? That's the most natural question to ask, because we have this understanding, and it's metaphysical, it's not scientific. Science depends upon this metaphysical notion that effects have causes adequate to the effect. So if somebody would have said, hey, yeah, that Big Bang, I know what happened. Somebody dropped a pin on the carpet. Well, that's not going to work because that's not adequate to the effect. No pin dropping on the carpet will make a Big Bang. So now the question is, given the Big Bang, and I know Christians are uneasy about this because they don't like Big Bang cosmology because they think it undermines God. I think it parallels the first line of our story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, bang. So at this particular point, the secular world and the Christian world agree that the universe had a beginning. What they don't agree on is the cause. And so my question is, what caused it? Now you only have two choices, Dan, either something or nothing. Pretty straightforward. Something caused the universe, therefore it would have to be outside of the universe. It would have to be outside of the material realm, the time, space, matter continuum. That was the effect. It would have to be outside of that. This would mean it would have to be non-material. Some would argue timeless. I'm not convinced of that, but nevertheless, we'll just follow that. Pretty smart, pretty powerful, and personal, because it takes a person to initiate a causal chain. In other words, a chain of events. If you have a bunch of dominoes standing up, nothing moves until somebody flicks the first domino, and then all the rest of the dominoes fall, okay? So in order to explain the Big Bang, we have to go outside of the natural realm to find an explanation. And it's going to have to be something like what I just described, which is pretty close to the God explanation. Or you could say, no, something didn't cause everything. Rather, nothing caused everything for no reason and for no purpose. And by the way, those go together. If the universe is uncaused, then it has no reason to be, and it has no purpose either. Those are part of the package, logically speaking. So, okay, everybody's got to decide. Dan, you have to decide. I got to decide. And every listener's got to decide. What is the most reasonable explanation? That nothing caused everything or something caused everything else? Well, it seems to me the second, not the first. I mean, a woman doesn't come home at night, looks in the garage and says, honey, where'd that Mercedes SL come from sitting in our garage? No problem, darling. That just popped into existence out of nothing. No cause. That's the way the universe happens, so I don't know why it can't happen to a Mercedes SL. Now, is Mom going to agree with that? Is she going to buy that story? No, of course not, because it's not reasonable. It's not the odds-on favorite. Where in our experience, our universal experience, do we have effects with no cause? We don't. So I'm not trying to give a proof, Dan, for God. I'm just simply saying that God is the odds-on favorite. He's the best explanation for the way things are. Now, I think in that line of reasoning, I've answered most of your questions, save one. And that is, where did God come from? You did make a comment about, well, this is, the universe is, or the earth is 3.5 billion years. The universe may be 14 billion. You said that's longer than the Bible states. Well, actually, that's not necessarily the case. There are some who hold to a young earth position and others who don't. But the Bible does not state how old the universe is or the earth is. One can infer an age from some of the texts, and this is where some of the young earthers go, but others infer a different age from the same texts. So what I'm saying is a young earth isn't a necessary part of the Christian worldview. Therefore, it's not a factor in this discussion. But you did say, well, where did God come from? And others have put it this way, who created God? When you ask, where did God come from, your question assumes something, and that is that God came from somewhere. I know that you don't quite mean it that way, but it's certainly implied that if the universe needs an explanation, where did it come from? You, Christians, say God. Then you tell me, where did God come from? But we're talking about apples and oranges here. My case that I just made, and it was what I offered you as a type of cosmological argument for the existence of God. This is called the Kalam cosmological argument, this particular kind. And it trades on the fact of the beginning of the universe coming into being. We know the universe came into being, and that's why it's appropriate to ask, where did that come from, or what caused the universe to come into being? It's an entirely appropriate question. And the answer's got to be something substantive. Saying nothing caused it is not going to be helpful. It's not the odds-on favor, that's for sure. But you can't say the same. You can't ask the same question about God, and because that no one who believes in God, no one who believes in God thinks that God came from somewhere. And even an atheist talking about the kind of God we're discussing understands that that's not the kind of God that had to come from somewhere either. I remember when I did my debate with Michael Shermer, a 3-hour national debate on radio on Hugh Hewitt's program, the Salem Network. Amy was there with me. We were sitting. We drove up. It was pouring rain as I'm pouring over my notes in the vehicle, and then we kind of quickly made our way into the studio. But I knew this issue would come up from Michael Shermer, who asked, well, who created God? Now, this is an illicit question, especially from somebody who ought to know better like Michael Shermer, but I knew it was going to come up because he always raises it in his debates. And what I said to him is, Michael, you don't believe God was created because you don't believe in God. I don't believe God was created because I'm convinced God is an eternal being and had no beginning. Nobody in this discussion believes God was created, so why are you asking the question, who created God? Now, there's nothing unusual about or incoherent, let me put it that way, about a being that had no beginning. If a being had no beginning, it doesn't need a beginner. And so the question, where did that God come from or who created God, is just off the mark entirely. Okay? But the question can be asked of the universe. Who created the universe? What caused the universe? And the only two options, something or nothing, are enough to help us to see that the most intelligent answer is that something, someone in this particular case, was the cause of the universe. The other option doesn't make any sense. In fact, I think Frank Turk was the person I heard this from the first time, is it's worse than magic. In magic, you have a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Okay, in this case, you have no magician, and you have no hat. You just got the rabbit popping into existence, the universe, that is. So I think I've covered most of your bases, Dan, and I encourage you to think about the answers I gave, because my argument here is not that this is a proof of God, but rather that this characterization of the origin of the universe is the one that makes the most sense. It's the odds-on favorite, all things considered. Break time here. Back with more of Dan in a moment on Stand to Reason. All right, let's hear from Dan again. Dan's got a lot of questions here and gives me an opportunity to make a couple of points that are helpful, I think, for most of you, and also maybe answering a question that you have as well. So, Dan, let's hear what you have to say about actually the fate of rape victims in the under the Old Testament law.
Greg, let's read Deuteronomy 22, verse 28 and 29. God commands a rape victim to marry her rapist. Are you kidding me? Can't wait to hear your gymnastics on this one, Greg. God forcing women to marry their rapist. Wow, unbelievable.
Well, that was short and sweet. I'll read it. Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 and 29. If a man finds a girl who is a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered, then, watch the language here, the man who lay with her shall give to the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall become his wife because he has violated her. Okay. You didn't get it quite right, Dan. The text does not, or the law does not command the rape victim to marry her rapist. It commands the rapist to marry his victim. It doesn't speak as to whether she can turn it down or not, which my suspicion is she probably can. But this is in the law, and to our sensibilities nowadays, it just seems like, please. In fact, I could hear it in your voice, Dan. Yeah, this is so completely bizarre. But this is a directive in the law that is meant not to punish the woman, but to protect her. You have to keep in mind the nature of the culture at that time. Women who had been violated were outcasts. What was left to a woman who had been violated even against her will? Prostitution. How was she going to take care of herself? Lots of people would not marry her. She is not eligible anymore. And consequently, she has no means to care for herself. This law is meant to protect the woman who has been violated, and it is also meant to discourage men from violating her. Notice what it says. She shall become his wife because he has violated her. He cannot divorce her all his days. So, yeah, this is a shotgun wedding. And there was a reason shotgun weddings were even popular in our country under a certain set of circumstances, because it guaranteed that the woman would be cared for, that she would be a member of the family. Is it ideal? No, it's terrible. Nevertheless, it's not as bad as if she was left to her own. And I know this in part because of what David's wife. Let me start over. David's daughter, Tamar, said when she was accosted by her brother Amnon, when she brought them the food, that is, to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, my sister." This is 2 Samuel 13. But she answered him, said, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. As for me, where could I get rid of my reproach?" Notice what she says. She doesn't want to be raped, obviously. But there's more to it than that. Where would I get rid of my reproach? And then, of course, he followed through. And then the text says, verse 15, Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, for the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and go away." But she said to him, now this is the woman who's just been violated, "No, because this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you have done to me." Yet he would not listen to her. So what you have to do, Dan, is you have to put yourself in the circumstances under which this particular law was given, all right? That that in the circumstances were the cultural environment that the violated woman had to live in, and the law is meant to protect her, okay? Now, by the way, the rape itself is punishable. And here in Deuteronomy 22, verse 25, but if in the field a man finds the girl who is engaged, and the man forces her, lies with her, then only the man who lies with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the girl, for there is no sin in the girl worthy of death. So rape is punished. Now, I don't know how this actually all works out with Amnon and his sister being raped here, but I want you to see from the internal evidence, from what we know about this, is a terrible crime. The woman isn't punished, but there's a provision in the law for her to be taken care of. And it seems to me, I don't know this for sure, but if she decided, I don't want to marry that guy, maybe her dad was going to take care of her, whatever, then that's up to her. She's not punished. But the man is obliged to take care of that woman for the rest of his life, and he cannot divorce her all his days. Hope that helps, Dan, for you to understand. And by the way, friends, notice that when we go to the Old Testament law, the Mosaic law, we have to always be careful to read it in the context of the culture in which it was given, and not read it in light of our own cultural sensibilities. This is a very different culture. People are very sympathetic to a woman who has been abused and violated in this way. By the way, I think it's different in Islamic culture. If a woman has been violated like that in Islamic culture, there is always the possibility of an honor killing. The brothers will kill the sister if she's been violated. So the same concept is carried over 2,000 years, or maybe 3,000 from that culture to now Muslim, at least experience now. It's not required as far as I know. I'm not conversant in Islamic law, but I do know this is a problem, that when the woman is violated, she is anathema even to her family members oftentimes, and that's where honor killings come in. So this is something even as a factor today, and the Mosaic law is meant to protect the woman from that liability. All right, let's see. Okay, I've got one, Isaac. All right, this is also in Genesis 1, Isaac. Let's see what Isaac has to say here. About
Hey guys, I'm not sure exactly how to word this question, but it involves the idea of chaos in the creation account in Genesis, and like God subduing and controlling chaos, and bringing order out of disorder. But then kind of this question arises as, where did the chaos come from? Did God create chaos? And if so, does that make sense? Like, can a logical and ordered God create something that is like known as like disorder and confusion? Unless my definition of that would be off. Anyways, if you could just maybe speak to that, that would be awesome. Much appreciated. Thanks so much for your time. Have a good day.
All right, Isaac, thank you for that. I'm right now in the middle of a woodworking project, making some file drawers to take out to our place in northern Wisconsin. It's a lot of fun. What I do, and actually I just went over to not Home Depot, Lowe's, the blue people across the street from Home Depot, and I got some beautiful straight grain Doug fir. And it makes beautiful stuff if you know how to put it together, and I'm working on it, okay? I get the stuff, then I prepare the material, then I assemble it into a finished product. When I get the stuff, it's disordered. It has not yet been ordered into the thing that I'm making, all right? when we read Genesis, the first couple of verses of chapter 1, we read that what God has made, he's produced this stuff that is tohu wabohu. Okay, it's kind of like, it's without form, I'm trying to remember exactly how it says it here in Genesis 1. But the idea is that it's formless, it's disordered. Okay, it isn't chaos like God created all this chaos. The earth was formless and void is the way the text reads. Formless and void. And what that means is that it was unsuitable for human habitation. Just like my wood is unsuitable for taking the files and materials that I'm going to put in the file cabinet when it's all done. I have to give attention to the material that I've just assembled to put it in a form so that it is suitable for the task I have in mind. That's all that's going on here in Genesis 1. We use the word chaos in our own vernacular to describe something kind of negative, right? Oh, man, I went into the house, it was total chaos. Either the people were total chaos, or the room was in total chaos, but that's not a good word, generally speaking. But as it's being used here, all it means is that it is, as the text says in my New American Standard, formless and void, but it doesn't mean, it just means it's disordered at this moment and not suitable for the purpose that God had for it, which is human habitation. Then what does he do? Then he makes it suitable. He takes these areas, and there's 3 different areas, and he organizes them somewhat, and then he fills them. All right? That's what he does here. So it's not like he's making a mess and then he's cleaning it up, because it would be fair then to ask the question, well, why did God make the mess to begin with? No, he didn't make a mess. He just gathered his stuff. Well, couldn't he just do that and everything was just so? Well, he could have, but he didn't. And he just did it in a sequence, and there's the sequence in Genesis 1. However you want to take the sequence, there is an orderly account of sorts, and the orderly account is meant to describe in some significant way the way God took the disorder and made it orderly so that it would be an appropriate place for human beings, the final element of his creation, to inhabit and flourish. Pretty straightforward, it seems to me. No confusion, just disorder in the sense that he's not done yet. Then he puts it together, and it's all good. All right, friends, that's it for this show. Thank you for joining me. Greg Kokel, The Stand to Reason. Give him heaven. Bye-bye now.